c'est-à-dire cet inconnu qui a harcelé la famille du petit Gregory et qui s'est mis à leur pourrir la vie.
Oui, ce corbeau, il a tué.
D'abord à travers des coups de téléphone et ensuite à travers des lettres anonymes.
Qui annonce le crime avant que le crime soit commis, déjà ça en fout tout le monde.
On October 16th, 1984, 4-year-old Gregory Villemin was playing outside in his garden in Lépanges-sur-Vallon, Vosges, in northeastern France. His beautiful, loving mother, Christine, was busy with household chores. After a while, it was time for Gregory to come inside. But when Gregory's mother went outside to call him in, she discovered that little Gregory was nowhere to be seen. With over 3,000 newspaper articles, 50 academic theses, and 15 books dedicated to uncovering the truth, the case has been shrouded in mystery and intrigue for over 30 years. Who was involved in Gregory's disappearance? And why did the case capture the attention of the media? Hello, and welcome back to M7 Crime Storytime, where we cover solved, unsolved, and twisted cases from around the world. Today, we're taking a deep dive into one of the most sensationalized and talked about mysteries in French history. Today, we look at the twisted case of 4-year-old little Gregory. But before we delve any further, please take the time to show your support by subscribing to our channel, liking our videos, and clicking on that notification bell to receive the latest videos straight to your inbox. Without further delay, let's dive into another crime mystery. Lépanges is a small village located in the northeastern part of France, in the Vosges department of the Lorraine region. It's situated in a hilly area near the border with Germany and is known for its beautiful natural surroundings, including forests, lakes, and rivers. The local economy of Lépanges is primarily based on agriculture and forestry. The village is surrounded by vast forests, which provide a source of wood for the local sawmills and paper mills. In addition, there are several farms in the area that produce crops such as wheat, corn, and potatoes. These industries provide jobs to the local people. It's here in this idyllic setting that the Villemin family resided, and our story begins. It was one of those towns where gossip travels very quickly. The Villemin family was a large extended family deeply rooted in their hometown. With numerous cousins, aunts, and uncles, their family consisted of around 80 to 90 members. Little did they know that during the late 70s and early 80s, their idyllic life would be marred by the presence of an anonymous caller known only as the Raven. Starting from around 1978, the family was tormented by this unknown caller, who singled out each member with eerie messages and sinister threats. The calls were not mere pranks, but rather a hauntingly calculated scheme to terrorize the entire family. But they didn't realize that this anonymous caller would be responsible for the family's long forthcoming struggle with the law and the media. The Villemins family once tight-knit community became a place of suspicion and paranoia, as everyone wondered who could be behind such a heinous act. The family's lives were forever changed by the Raven and what he did in 1984. The haunting memories of those calls would stay with them for years to come. The name was based on a famous French movie about a woman who discovers that her husband is cheating on her. Outraged, she decides to seek revenge by sending anonymous letters to all the wives in their small village, exposing their husband's infidelity, signed as the Raven. Despite the fictional nature of the Raven, the term became associated with anonymous letters in France, especially those used to expose infidelity. In the real case of the Villemin family, the enigmatic Raven continued to torment them with a barrage of unsettling phone calls and letters. The caller's tactics were unpredictable and ranged from heavy breathing and sinister giggling to outright death threats. The only thing that the Villemin family was certain about was that the 26-year-old Jean-Marie was not the elusive Raven caller. Despite being a successful supervisor at a factory and known as the Little Boss Man, many family members felt he'd become arrogant and disconnected from his working-class roots. This animosity toward Jean-Marie was shared by the mysterious caller, who made it clear through their letters and phone calls that they despised him. The Villemin family knew that the caller's hatred for Jean-Marie ruled Jean out as a suspect, leaving them no closer to identifying the true culprit behind the Raven moniker. Jean-Marie was the primary target of the Raven's harassment. The caller's hatred of him stemmed from his success as a factory supervisor and his recent marriage to the 24-year-old Christine, a woman from a prestigious background who was admired for her eloquence and beauty. On the 24th of August 1980, Christine gave birth to Gregory Villemin. Jean-Marie and Christine were envied for their good looks and love for each other. And by 1983, Gregory was 3 years old. During that time, Gregory noticed the stress on his parents' faces every time the phone rang. The boy, only 3 years old, called the caller Mr. Man. In 1983, the couple moved to a beautiful house outside of town, hoping for some peace. But the Raven wasn't done yet. The caller became even more obsessed with Jean-Marie's success and started threatening to harm Christine. He'd call Jean-Marie at work and describe in detail the traps he'd laid out for Christine. Jean-Marie tried to stay strong and not give in to the Raven's threats. But the caller continued to push the limits, asking what Jean-Marie would do if he set their house on fire. Despite being concerned, Jean-Marie refused to show fear or give in to the caller's demands. Frustrated, the Raven upped the stakes by threatening to harm their 3-year-old son, Gregory. The Raven warned Jean-Marie not to let their son play outside after school, saying that he'd kidnap him. Jean-Marie, a loving father, was incensed by the threat and told the caller that he would kill him if he touched his son. The Raven realized that he'd finally found Jean-Marie's breaking point. The caller then disappeared for a year and a half, during which time there were no further calls to the Villemin family. Maybe this was because the family had alerted the police and started recording the calls. But this idea did not work, as the Raven shifted to sending vicious letters. These letters were not only filled with loathsome threats, but also contained direct and explicit references to the boss, Jean-Marie, who was responsible for overseeing a group of 20 men. The letter's contents were disturbing and deeply unsettling, with one vowing to skin the family alive, while others promised to spit upon their graves. The year was 1984, and there'd been a year and a half of silence with no suspicious threats or aggressive activities. The family thought that the Raven was gone for good. On October 16, 1984, Christine, Gregory's mother, picked up little Gregory after work from daycare. She went into the house and started playing music, while Gregory went outside to play in the front yard, as he always did. Around 5 p.m., it was time for Gregory to come inside. She looked outside, and Gregory wasn't there. She started to panic, but wasn't too alarmed since the Raven had been gone for a year and a half. Christine went out to look for Gregory. When she couldn't find him, she went to the houses of Gregory's friends, but no one knew where Gregory was. As she returned to her home, she received a phone call. It was her mother-in-law. She said, "The Raven has your son." The mother-in-law explained that her other son, Michel, who was Jean's brother, received a call from the Raven claiming that little Gregory's body had been dumped into a nearby river. Christine called the police, and they immediately began searching for little Gregory. However, within just a few hours of his disappearance, at around 9 p.m., they found his lifeless body floating in the local river. He was still wearing his little hat, which had been pulled down over his face so that it was impossible to see his face. He had on the same blue jacket that he'd worn for daycare earlier that day. But most disturbingly, he was tied up in a strange and ritualistic manner. His arms were bound, but he was still standing upright. They pulled him out of the river and were faced with the sight of a tiny 4-year-old body. Removing the hat, they were struck by how peaceful he looked. The cause of death was determined to be drowning from asphyxiation, but the way he was tied up made little sense. He was only 4 years old. If he was drowned, he wouldn't have struggled, cried, or even screamed. So why did he look so serene? As the investigation into the death of little Gregory continued, the police spoke to several people in the area. One person came forward with an insulin needle they'd found near the local river. Initially, the police suspected that someone from the Villemin family was responsible for Gregory's murder, as they believed the culprit must have had inside knowledge of the family's daily routines and activities. The case attracted the attention of journalists across France who traveled to the small town hoping to help solve the mystery. Then the next day, on October 17, 1984, a letter arrived at Jean-Marie and Christine's house. It had been mailed on the day Gregory was murdered and was postmarked from within the village. The letter contained a chilling message. "Hey boss, I hope you're happy now. Money won't bring back your son. This is my revenge." The writer referred to Jean-Marie as boss, which was a nickname given to him because he was the only one in his family to break out of the working class. The letter also suggested that the writer held a grudge against multiple members of the family. After receiving the letter, it was time for Gregory's funeral. On the 19th of October 1984, the entire family and town showed up, including all the police officers, hoping to analyze the faces of the guests for any suspicious behavior. Many journalists from France also attended the funeral, making it a big spectacle. They wanted pictures and photographs of the so-called event. During the funeral, the police were specifically looking for anyone who wasn't crying or was behaving erratically. But the press, they were busy with their photos and their videos. Despite Christine's heart-wrenching cries during the burial, the press didn't stop. The press took a lot of photos and videos of the funeral, including Christine being carried out because she was unable to stand. Although the police tried hard, the funeral didn't yield any new leads in the investigation. It only yielded more content for the vulture-like journalists. The police proceeded in bringing in the rest of the Villemin family for questioning. They decided to adopt a technique from the Raven movie mentioned earlier and instructed all family members to sit down and write the same letter with both their right and left hands. Afterward, the police said that they would get back to them once they analyzed the handwriting. They also interviewed distant relatives and family friends who reported receiving calls from what sounded like a woman, prompting the police to consider the possibility of multiple suspects. That is, this Raven character could be a woman, or a pair of a man and a woman, or just a miscreant who is mimicking these voices. The police now had the challenge of analyzing all the handwriting samples they'd gathered, as well as the new information about the possible involvement of a woman in the crime. As the handwriting samples were being analyzed by experts, the police considered the fact that the Raven had disappeared for a year and a half. They wondered if there had been some sort of event that triggered the Raven to get mad again, as they couldn't understand why they would go silent. The only thing they could find was that Jean-Marie's brother, Michel, had recently come over with his wife to Jean and Christine's house. Now, Michel was jealous of his brother's success and had a hard time holding down a job. 2 days before little Gregory disappeared, he was invited over to the Villemin house and was shown their new house extension, leather couch, and car. The police thought that maybe Michel was jealous of this, and this had triggered him to go into hiding and plan and commit the murder of Gregory. As the police questioned Michel, the handwriting experts knocked on the door with a surprising revelation. They had found a match to the handwriting, and it belonged to a cousin named Bernard Laroche, not Michel. This was a shock to everyone, and the police now had a new suspect to focus on. But the police wondered, who was Bernard, and why would he do this? Bernard Laroche was Jean-Marie's cousin from his mother's side. He was orphaned at a young age and started living with the brothers Jean and Michel. He spent a lot of time with Michel as they were very close, more like brothers than cousins. However, once Jean-Marie got married to Christine, conflicts began to arise between Bernard and Jean-Marie. Bernard disliked Christine and would often criticize her, calling her arrogant, annoying, snobbish, and stuck-up. But Jean-Marie defended his wife, saying that Christine was just misunderstood. This led to a lot of fighting between the two. The police confronted Bernard Laroche, presenting him with the evidence that his handwriting matched that of the Raven's letters. They demanded an explanation from him, to which he replied that he had an alibi for that day. He was with his sister-in-law. She was married to Bernard's brother and was not related to the Villemin family. Bernard claimed that he'd been with her the entire time and that there was no way he could have been at the river. The police informed Bernard that they'd be questioning his sister-in-law to verify his alibi. The investigators then brought in Bernard Laroche's sister-in-law, the 15-year-old Muriel, who claimed to have been with them on the day of Gregory's disappearance. She told the police that Bernard was telling the truth. However, during further questioning, a horrifying twist emerged that made the interrogation more complex. Muriel eventually admitted to lying and revealed that they'd not stayed home as she initially claimed. Instead, Bernard had picked her up from school and they went to a stranger's house. There, Bernard picked up a 4-year-old child and they drove to a nearby river. Bernard got out of the car with the child and returned without him. Muriel had not thought much of it at the time. She confessed to everything. After so many days, the police had an actual confession, and the handwriting tactic actually worked. The police informed the judge of Muriel's confession, as they could not hold Bernard without the judge's consent. The police had to obtain an arrest warrant from the presiding judge, Judge Lambert, based on Muriel's confession. However, when they went to him, he refused to hear her statement as it was a Friday, and the next 2 days would be holidays. This was something unheard of from a judge, especially when the case had attracted national attention. But he suggested that they send her home with Bernard and ask her not to reveal anything to him until Monday. The police followed the judge's advice and sent Muriel home with Bernard. This move was also uncalled for, as Muriel could easily have told Bernard about her confession, and Bernard could have fled, or worse, Muriel could have changed her statement. But despite the possibility of her changing her story over the weekend or being influenced by others, she did not retract her statement when the police spoke to her again on Monday. On Monday, Muriel went to see Judge Lambert and repeated the same story. Her statement pretty much confirmed that Bernard Laroche was the killer of Gregory. They let Muriel go on Monday, and the judge immediately ordered Bernard's arrest. The revelation of Muriel's statement caused an uproar in the village. But how did the villagers know that it was Muriel who was the witness? Well, Judge Lambert publicly revealed Muriel's name on television, which was obviously not ideal, since it put her in a dangerous position and the case was still under investigation. The news led to Muriel being questioned by her sister, who was understandably upset. The rumors spread that Muriel was beaten up by her family members for her involvement in Bernard's arrest. So now, about a week after Bernard Laroche had been arrested and imprisoned, Muriel came on TV to speak with journalists. At this point, there was another twist in the story. Muriel claimed that the police had threatened to send her to a reformatory, tortured her, bullied her, and that's why she made a false confession. Everything she had said was a lie. She was scared and they kept telling her that Bernard was guilty, so she went along with it. As a result, the judge had nothing against Bernard. Additionally, the handwriting analysis was thrown out of court due to some shady practices by the experts. The samples they'd taken were mixed with other samples, and even the experts could not figure out whose handwriting they were judging. Technically, they had nothing on Bernard Laroche, and he was released from prison. After this, Jean-Marie, the father of Gregory, was seen on TV saying that he would kill Bernard Laroche himself if the law didn't do it. He was convinced that Bernard had murdered his son, and this statement foreshadowed potential violence to come. By now, the media was playing a big role in this murder, which was eventually becoming a scandal. First, Judge Lambert revealed Muriel's name on TV. Then Muriel appeared on TV to reveal that the police mistreated her. And now, Jean-Marie had taken an oath on the TV that he would kill Bernard himself. By this point, the case was getting controlled by the media and misinformation. It was never confirmed whether the police actually threatened Muriel. She claimed that they threatened to send her away to a reformatory, but the truth is uncertain. Additionally, there were rumors that her family members beat her up to retract her confession after the judge revealed her name.
J'avais dit que j'étais dans le corps, là. Les gendarmes ont crié que j'étais pas dans le corps. Le chauffeur de corps qui avait dit que j'étais pas dans le corps. Puis après, ils ont commencé à dire que Bernard avait avoué, que c'était le corbeau, tout ça.
Meanwhile, as all of this was unfolding, 4 girls unexpectedly showed up at the police office with news which seemed suspicious. The 4 girls claimed to have seen Christine, Gregory's mother, at the post office on the day of the murder, which Christine had not mentioned to the police. This led the police to question whether Christine was involved in her son's murder. Christine insisted that she went to the post office on Monday, October 15, 1984, the day before Gregory went missing. The police found a receipt that Christine had sent off at the post office, but it didn't have a postmark date, so it could have been from either Monday or Tuesday. The police began to question Christine, suspecting that whomever had mailed the letter was the one who murdered Gregory. The journalists covering the case of Gregory Villemin's murder were divided into 2 groups, those who believed Christine was involved and those who didn't. Judge Lambert was enjoying the attention the case was receiving from the national media of France. He went out of his way to pose for pictures and even asked journalists to take pictures of him in a natural setting, like at a market buying groceries. This was all caught on an audio recording that would later be released. But at the same time, these pictures were being printed in the newspapers. Judge Lambert was now in 2 minds about the case, whether to convict Bernard or convict Christine. Whichever way he chose, he had no proof on either of them. Some journalists were even heard saying that Lambert had a crush on Christine because she was very attractive and mesmerizing. She even looked younger than her age, and her looks were captivating, almost casting a spell. And so, Christine became France's most hated woman overnight. If she was convicted and went to jail, she would be the worst mother. But if she were found not guilty, it's because the judge loved her. This was what the media was feeding to the general public. Amidst all this, Christine and Jean-Marie decided to sell their house and try to get pregnant again. They were struggling to cope after the harassment from the press and the murder of their 4-year-old son. Friends and family encouraged them to have another child, believing it would give them a reason to live. Christine and Jean-Marie conceived a set of twins in 1985. Meanwhile, the press continued to criticize and hate on Christine, with a police officer even commenting on her attire and claiming it was too flirtatious for a grieving woman. When it was announced that Christine was pregnant again and she began to show, people accused her of trying to use her pregnancy as a way to gain sympathy and avoid prison. The police brought her in for questioning again, focusing on the false accusations that she had an affair and that Gregory was not Jean-Marie's child. They also asked her to do a handwriting test and write the Raven's letters with both her right and left hand, which she did before returning home. Christine and Jean-Marie waited for the results of the handwriting tests, as the police and the judge had no evidence against Christine. These tests would confirm that Christine was not involved at all in Gregory's murder, and the couple could at last focus on their lives. But after a couple of weeks, on the 25th of March 1985, the press announced that the judge had confirmed the match of Christine's handwriting. This was devastating for the mother. She stopped eating, broke down, and was hospitalized. During this time, she lost one of her twins due to the stress caused by the judge's actions. The judge informed her that she was going to be arrested and tried for her own son's murder. Jean-Marie wanted nothing more than to take his wife home, but she was still hospitalized. He began to wander around outside, feeling lost and helpless. On March 29, 1985, Jean went to Gregory's cemetery where he claimed to hear his deceased son speaking to him. In a fit of rage and despair, Jean drove to Bernard Laroche's house and shot him in front of his family with a shotgun. Filled with remorse, he immediately drove to the clinic to confess to Christine and apologize for what he'd done. He then turned himself into the police station. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to 5 years in prison. With credit for time served awaiting trial and a partial suspension of the sentence, he was released in December 1987 after having served 2.5 years. Meanwhile, the media went into a frenzy over the shocking events that had unfolded. Christine, pregnant and now without Jean, was left to face the aftermath alone. After the shooting, Christine was released from the hospital but faced harsh criticism from the press. They accused her of being a witch who used spells to get pregnant again, and of being a terrible mother who murdered her own son. Christine tried to stay strong in public and didn't show her emotions, fearing that the press would twist her sadness into something negative. However, this led people to describe her as cold and unfeeling. To make matters worse, rumors began to surface that Christine had run off with another man just 2 months before her wedding to Jean-Marie. People speculated that she never wanted to get married, have children, or be tied down to a son. Another rumor was spread by Judge Lambert that alleged Jean-Marie brought home 2 steaks for Christine, who overcooked them. In response, Jean-Marie slapped her. Though the story seemed untrue, the judge told journalists about it. This further fueled public criticism of Christine. The media supported this narrative that Christine became increasingly angry, particularly for mothers who were abused by their husbands or held back by their children. This led to new press headlines that she had turned herself into a witch by sacrificing her son. The judge decided to arrest Christine because of the public's growing outrage. She was 6 months pregnant at the time and had already been away from her husband. Despite a lack of evidence, in July 1985, Christine was charged with Gregory's murder. She went on a hunger strike for 11 days in protest, and Jean-Marie followed suit. Christine was freed after an appeals court cited flimsy evidence and the absence of a coherent motive. 2 months later, Christine gave birth to her son, and she was paid by journalists for pictures of her holding him. Christine agreed because Jean-Marie and her had lost their home, and now they also had to pay for their legal defense. Despite the destitute state of the family, the pictures were later used to write a nasty article that suggested she would kill her next child. What was interesting to notice was that the same 3 journalists were writing under different names for dozens of news outlets, making it seem like the whole world hated Christine. But in reality, it was just those 3 people. Later that year, Christine's health took a toll on her. She overdosed on tranquilizers and was taken to the hospital, but thankfully, she did not lose her life. In 1987, the main judge, Judge Lambert, was removed from the case after it was discovered that he had no evidence to arrest Christine and had engaged in shady practices. He'd been arranging meetings with journalists at the market to spread rumors and accusations against Christine. He was replaced by a new judge who took a fresh look at the case and did a lot of thorough work. During his 1-year sabbatical, Judge Lambert wrote a book about the case. In it, he described Christine as one of the most captivating people he'd ever met. He also labeled her as manipulative and an evil black widow, causing confusion among the public. However, the new judge refused to base his conclusions on the previous judge's opinions and thoroughly investigated the case. Eventually, Christine and her son were allowed a breather. The second judge decided to follow the insulin lead in the Gregory Villemin case, as it made sense that the child looked peaceful when found in the river. Upon investigation, they discovered that the only person in the family who had access to insulin prescriptions was Bernard Laroche's mother-in-law, as she had diabetes. However, the Laroches were uncooperative during questioning. Soon after, a journalist was able to trick Judge Number 2 into giving an interview, secretly recording the conversation. In the recording, the second judge revealed that he believed the Laroches were guilty and that Bernard was the culprit. The journalist released the recording, causing the second judge to be taken off the case. A few weeks later, he was found in a coma in his cabin after suffering a heart attack. After the second judge went into a coma, he suffered from memory loss and could not recall the case of Christine and Gregory. A third judge was then appointed to take on the case. The judge reviewed the work that the second judge had done and concluded that there was not enough evidence to charge Christine with any crime. Thus, all charges against her were formally dropped on February 2, 1993, and it was publicly declared that she was innocent. Despite this, none of the journalists who had slandered Christine apologized for their actions. After this, in 2000, the authorities requested to check the DNA, as all the letters from the Raven had a licked stamp. However, when they attempted to test the DNA, it was discovered that the letters had not been stored properly in evidence, rendering the DNA almost unusable. In 2000, there were talks about reopening the case after the discovery that DNA testing was possible on the licked stamps from the Raven's letters. Despite the attention the case had been receiving, there were no significant developments, and the case went cold in 2001 after DNA testing on a stamp used for one of the Raven's letters yielded no new evidence. In 2004, 3 years after the last DNA test, the Villemins finally received compensation of 35,000 euros from the court for the immense personal harm they endured due to the mishandling of their son's investigation. The cameras, the jail time, the wrongful accusations, it was all too much for any parent to bear. And let's not forget the years of living in fear, never knowing when or where the mysterious Raven would strike again. Fast forward to 2008, and investigators were once again poring over the evidence. At the request of the Villemin, they ran further tests to look for DNA on Gregory's bindings and some of the letters. Could this finally be the breakthrough they'd been waiting for? But alas, all came up inconclusive. The killer was still out there, taunting them. But hope was not yet lost. In April 2013, they decided to test Gregory's clothing and shoes next. Could this be it? Would they finally find the crucial evidence they needed to solve this case once and for all? But the odds were against them. If the killer did leave some DNA behind, the water more than likely had washed it away. Still, they persisted. They had to give the Villemins some closure, some peace of mind. The tension was palpable as they awaited the results of the tests. And when they finally came back, it was yet another blow. Inconclusive yet again. The killer was still out there, lurking in the shadows. The question remained, would they ever catch him? The case of Gregory Villemin's murder remained cold until June 2017, when a glimmer of hope emerged in the form of a cutting-edge software called Anacrim. With the power to flag inconsistencies in suspect statements, the police began combing through interviews with Villemin's extended family, leading them to Marcel and Jacqueline Jacob, the boy's great-aunt and uncle. With evidence pointing towards the Raven being the work of a man and a woman, the police suspected that the couple might fit the profile. Moreover, they had a motive, as they were believed to have a grudge against Muriel Boll, a key witness in the case. Marcel and Jacqueline Jacob raised Bernard Laroche when Bernard's mother died. And so they were certainly angry at Muriel for her confession. Her confession eventually became the reason for the death of Bernard. The police were also investigating why Muriel Boll reverted her confession about Bernard and who allegedly beat Muriel, which led her to change her statements in front of the media. As the investigation intensified, the tension rose, and the suspects were finally questioned. But just when it seemed like the case was about to be solved, all three were released, as the police couldn't reach any conclusion through the interrogation. This left the police and the public frustrated, and no closer to finding the real killer. The announcement that Gregory's case would be reopened sent shockwaves through the local community. But it was the sudden and mysterious death of the first judge, Judge Lambert, that truly sent chills down spines. On July 11, 2017, Judge Lambert was found lifeless with a plastic bag over his face. The police claimed that he had taken his own life by asphyxiating himself. But with mounting pressure from the renewed investigation, many began to question whether there was more to the story than met the eye. Lambert's farewell letter to the local newspaper only added to the intrigue, hinting at secrets and scandals within the French justice system. The judge said that he refused to be the scapegoat again. Judge Lambert was the judge responsible for sending Muriel back home when she confessed that Bernard was the killer. He was also responsible for the witch theory that devastated Christine for years. In 2018, the Villemin case was once again thrust into the spotlight as Muriel Boll, a central figure in the investigation, published a bombshell book entitled Breaking the Silence. In the pages of this book, she accused the police of extracting a false confession from her and maintained the innocence of her cousin Bernard, who'd been charged with Gregory's murder. She also wrote that the cousin who claimed Muriel had been beaten into taking her statement back was outright lying. But Muriel's explosive allegations didn't sit well with her own family, as the cousin took offense to her claims and filed a complaint against her. Soon, Muriel found herself indicted for aggravated defamation in 2019. As the Villemin family's decades-long search for answers continued, they received a glimmer of hope in December 2020. French media revealed that a Swiss firm's analysis of the threatening letters had pointed to a single suspect. Finally, it seemed like the truth was within their grasp. But in a tragic twist of fate, the identity of the suspect was never revealed, leaving the family once again grappling with the uncertainty and despair of not knowing who was responsible for their unimaginable suffering. As the new year dawned, the Villemins continued to fight for justice. In January 2021, an appeals court in Dijon accepted their requests to compare DNA samples found on evidence to determine whether they came from their extended family. But with the years ticking by and no solid answers in sight, the family's hopes of closure faded with each passing day. The Villemin family's story is a stark reminder of the cruel and senseless nature of crime. Despite their tireless efforts, the family has still not been able to find the peace and resolution they so desperately craved. Instead, they've been left with an agonizing void, forever haunted by the mystery of what really happened to their beloved little Gregory. The case remains an unsolved mystery. The Villemins are yet to know who killed little Gregory. That's all about the mysterious disappearance of Gregory Villemin. We hope you found it as fascinating as we did. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think that the judges could have done a better job? And what other suspects do you think further DNA analysis could uncover? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories with immense drama and mind-boggling twists.